the King's Law. In the year 2028, the state had transformed into something unrecognizable. The founder's vision laying in tatters as the nation's leader, President Grump ascended to a status beyond reproach, wielding absolute power with impunity. It all began with a Supreme Court ruling that granted the president immunity from any criminal prosecution related to his official acts. At first, the repercussions were subtle. A few questionable pardons, a whisper of corruption here and there. But soon, the nightmare scenarios that Justice Harris had warned of in his dissent began to unfold. This plan, codenamed Project Forever, was devised by key figures within the president's party to ensure the long-term dominance of their agenda. Dillard, a political strategist and confidant of Grump, masterminded the scheme, ensuring every detail was meticulously planned. The project aimed to dismantle democratic institutions slowly, preparing for the ultimate power grab in 2028. During his first term, Grump had subtly undermined congressional oversight by promoting gridlock and partisan divisions, a strategy he continued to employ after regaining control of the White House. He used executive orders extensively, bypassing the legislative process whenever possible. Additionally, Grump's party strategically placed loyal judges in lower courts, ensuring any challenges to their actions would face significant legal hurdles. The Supreme Court appointments were the culmination of a decade-long effort to reshape the judiciary. Grump's first move in his second term was to subtly dismiss dissenting voices within his administration. To ensure absolute loyalty, he instituted a series of loyalty tests designed to weed out those who might oppose his plans. High-ranking officials were summoned to private meetings where they were required to swear personal oaths of loyalty to Grump. These oaths were recorded, and any hesitation or lack of enthusiasm was noted. Comprehensive background checks were conducted on all officials, including their financial records, personal communications, and associations. Any connection to known critics or opposition figures was grounds for dismissal. Social media activity was closely monitored. Officials were expected to actively promote Grump's agenda and defend his actions online. Failure to do so, or engaging in any form of criticism, was met with immediate repercussions. To further ensure compliance, Grump cultivated a network of informants within the administration. These informants reported on the behavior and conversations of their colleagues, ensuring that any potential dissenters were quickly identified. With a loyal inner circle in place, Grump turned his attention to the media. Under the guise of national security, he ordered the federal law enforcement to fabricate evidence against journalists who dared to investigate him. Prominent media outlets like BNN were targeted, with their top reporters arrested on charges of espionage and their offices raided by federal agents. BNN was shut down entirely, its assets seized and its voice silenced. The remaining media was either co-opted or intimidated into compliance, ensuring that only favorable coverage of the president reached the public. Reign knew no bounds. He accepted bribes from foreign corporations in exchange for lucrative government contracts, channeling the money into offshore accounts. He also began selling pardons to the highest bidders, releasing dangerous criminals back into society for the right price. This influx of illicit funds allowed him to further entrench his power, buying loyalty from key figures in both the government and private sectors. The Supreme Court decision provided Grump with a shield against any repercussions for his actions, as long as they could be framed as official acts. He declared the acceptance of bribes as essential for securing international alliances, claiming that it was in the nation's best interest. Investigations into his financial misconduct were shut down under the pretense that they interfered with national security operations. His acts of corruption became untouchable, justified as necessary for the greater good. As Grump's second term neared its end, he faced a constitutional barrier. The two-term limit for presidents, determined to remain in power, Project Forever's final phase was set into motion. First, Grump declared a state of perpetual national emergency, citing a fabricated threat of a rogue artificial intelligence allegedly developed by foreign adversaries and capable of disrupting the nation's critical infrastructure. This allowed him to invoke emergency powers that granted him broad executive authority. So next, Grump moved to consolidate his emergency powers through legal channels. Dillard and other strategists pushed through Congress a series of laws under the guise of national security and stability. The National Security Enhancement Act granted the President authority to take any measures deemed necessary to combat the AI threat, including overriding state and local laws, detaining individuals suspected of collaborating with foreign adversaries, and controlling all critical infrastructure. The Emergency Communications Control Act allowed the government to seize control of all communications networks, including the Internet, social media, and news outlets, to prevent the spread of disinformation and ensure the dissemination of official information. The Election Integrity Act instituted strict voting regulations, including mandatory biometric voter identification, extensive background checks for all election officials, and the authority to postpone or cancel elections in the event of a national emergency. The laws were passed with minimal opposition, as many members of Congress were either loyal to Grump or too intimidated to resist. To further legitimize his extended rule, Grump orchestrated a national referendum. The referendum, presented as a democratic exercise, asked citizens to vote on whether the president should be granted special powers to deal with the ongoing national emergency. The referendum was heavily manipulated. Opposition voices were suppressed and propaganda flooded the media. The results, predictably, were overwhelmingly in favor of Grump. In addition to the referendum, the president's party sought to alter the structure of future elections. They introduced and passed measures to restrict voting access, such as stringent voter ID laws, reduced polling places in opposition strongholds, and purges of voter rolls. These measures disproportionately affected minority and low-income voters, ensuring that the electorate became more favorable to Grump's continued rule. They also implemented new laws that enabled state governments to overturn election results based on claims of fraud, effectively allowing them to disregard the popular vote. Grump's party worked to undermine the integrity of the electoral process by appointing loyalists to key positions within election commissions and boards of elections. These individuals had the power to certify or reject election results, ensuring that any unfavorable outcomes could be challenged or dismissed. With the legal and public facade in place, Grump used these emergency powers to issue executive orders that effectively suspended the constitutional term limits. Grump framed this as a necessary measure to maintain stability and continuity in a time Congress, weakened and filled with his loyalists, did not challenge the orders. The judiciary, packed with judges appointed by Grump, upheld the legality of his actions. To further consolidate his hold on power, Grump manipulated the electoral process. Voting irregularities were rampant, with reports of tampered machines, lost ballots, and voter intimidation in key districts. Opposition leaders were detained on spurious charges, preventing them from mounting effective campaigns. The media, now a mouthpiece for the regime, portrayed Grump as the only viable leader in a time of chaos. Having secured his position, Grump then orchestrated a military coup to cement his hold. Tanks rolled into the capital, and Grump declared martial law, framing it as a necessary step to restore order in a nation plagued by unrest. This overt show of force crushed any remaining opposition and demonstrated that the president was willing to use the military to maintain control. Grump's most insidious act came when he used federal agencies to target minority communities. Under the pretense of combating crime, he ordered mass raids and detentions, filling private prisons with innocent people. These prisons, owned by companies that had generously donated to his campaigns, reaped enormous profits. This move not only secured financial support for his regime, but also instilled fear among the populace, further solidifying his control. Grump's transformation from a controversial leader to a full-fledged dictator was both gradual and abrupt. Policies that chipped away at democratic institutions were followed by swift, decisive actions that eradicated any remaining checks on his power. The judiciary was packed with loyalists who rubber-stamped his every decree. Congress was rendered impotent, its members either cowed into submission or replaced by sycophants. By the time the full extent of his power was realized, it was too late. Elections were reduced to mere formalities, with outcomes predetermined by Grump's inner circle. The media was a mouthpiece for the regime, broadcasting endless propaganda that glorified the president and demonized his enemies. The nightmare had come true. Grump was untouchable, his power absolute. The country that once prided itself on its democratic ideals had fallen into despotism. The rule of law was dead, and America had ceased to be a democracy.